Let's just start with a question about, in general, how to talk to a Republican and how to talk to a Democrat about microlending, micro businesses. Are there certain phrases that resonate more, with Republicans and Democrats than others? And should you use terms like underserved? That term has always kind of bugged me. I've been on the Hill covering the SBA and other small business issues for about 15 years, and I don't feel I can write a story and say underserved because that seems too undefined for my audiences. And I usually end up saying like low-income communities or something, which might not necessarily be accurate. So maybe if you could give us some advice on how better to talk about the audience that you guys are serving. But anyway, let's start off with that question. What's the best way to talk to you all on these issues around microlending? What phrases and what resonates?
Well, Ken, thanks for the introduction, and it's great to be here with you. I think on small businesses, you're going to find that Steve and I are going to probably agree more than we disagree, at least on...
That's not fun.
Well, we're going to find some opportunities to disagree. We'll make this fun. No, but I think that both parties view small business owners with a lot of respect. From a reputation standpoint, you always hear the president, you always hear Democrats talking about the small business owner. They're viewed as the engine of the economy. They create the jobs. And so you have an impeccable reputation. And as far as folks who lend to small businesses, micro businesses, I think you all as well are viewed very well by Democrats and I would imagine also Republicans. And before I tackle that question, I wanted to just go in a little bit on kind of the context, because I think in order to communicate effectively, it requires four things: the context, the message, the messenger, and the audience, and knowing your audience. And right now, the context for the mood of this country has changed a good deal since last year. People have a more favorable view of the economy. You'll see there's the CNN poll had the outlook on the economy 52-48, so there's an improved view of the economy. That has benefited to some degree the president's approval rating, both overall and on the economic issue. A year ago, he was underwater both on overall approvals and specifically on the economy, and that has changed. He is now either even or has a one or two favorable advantage on the economy. Most people look at the future and are optimistic for their children, particularly Democrats, and I can get into some of those numbers later. They weren't so optimistic about opportunities over the last 20 years. So that is a change. But I think one of the things that is a thread that runs through this entire country is this anxiety that hardworking American families, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, independents, feel about paying their bills. And more importantly, the long-term retirement security that they feel like they're not going to be able to save for the future, and most importantly, invest and send their kids to college. And those are those are two real key anxieties that folks feel today. And it's one of the things, if you look at concerns, that if you look at the way Democrats talk about the economy and talk about themselves, that they always hit on. I often make what we call a message triangle for candidates and for clients, and it's basically the four legs of a stool in terms of how you talk about yourself. And the way Democrats right now talk about themselves, the main kind of point that they use to define themselves is that they are championing middle-class priorities which create good-paying jobs, ensure greater opportunities, and a secure future for all Americans. Another key plank of that is building an economy that works for everyone, not just the wealthy few. Investing in hardworking but underpaid Americans, and then reforming Washington by putting government on the side of hardworking Americans, not special interests. So if you were to kind of distill what the core values of the Democratic Party are today, it's those 4 message points. And I think as an organization that supports small businesses, when you're talking about how to talk to Democrats, the way you're going to connect with Democrats is, one, recognize that many Democrats represent, especially in the House, but even in the Senate as well, they represent districts that are poor, struggling in this economy. The economy has improved, but there are still many people who don't have jobs, or if they have jobs, they have 3 jobs. So many people who are having a very hard time, not just paying for college and saving for retirement, but paying for milk and groceries. And so connecting what you do for small businesses and what small businesses do for the larger economy is very important. So talking about jobs that support hardworking but underpaid Americans, creating good paying jobs and generating economic growth. Both parties, I think, today will tell you that you got to be talking about jobs and you got to be talking about growth. Economic fairness, which is a larger umbrella issue that is still kind of hard to define, is something that you'll hear many progressive Democrats talk about, but for the most part, it's jobs and it's growth. Helping to build an economy that works for everyone. That's a key message point that I think small businesses can point to. And helping to invest in the next generation to ensure a brighter future. This gets to the whole point of the paying for college and looking forward, not backwards. Helping Americans build a secure retirement that they've earned. Supporting small businesses by providing them. You mentioned there is a question. I was asked a question by one of the organizers about this term technical assistance, which I'm not really entirely sure if you ask me, a layman, on these issues, what it means. How I would suggest you message that is talking about you're providing small business owners, small businesses with the tools they need to succeed and prosper. As far as the issue of underserved communities, that can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. Low income is one. I think forgotten communities is another one as well. And that, I think, encompasses both rural communities and inner city areas as well. And then also just talking about how you're making investments in the job creators of tomorrow. Jobs may not immediately become, businesses may not immediately create jobs, but it's talking about how you're investing in businesses that can create jobs for the future. So those are some thoughts from my side of the aisle. And Stephen.
Yeah, and Stephen, go ahead and give your opening statement. I jumped right ahead of the question.
I think Doug and I are looking at some of the same numbers. I mean, I think there's the way you're going to message it is going to be somewhat similar. I would say on the macro side of the equation, we're going into an on-year election, right? We're going into a presidential. We have a number of Republican presidential candidates coming out, and especially on our side of the aisle, and maybe a little on their side of the aisle. The new way elected officials that are running for election, and those who are aspiring to become elected officials, certainly those who are aspiring to become the president, are looking at the Republican primary. And so when I think about how do I counsel a client or those who ask me how to message to a Republican elected official or those who are going to potentially become a Republican elected official, I think about look at the Republican primary. Look at those candidates who are running for election and look at the language they're using. And I would say if you look at the polling from a Republican perspective, and Republican primary voter polling, that tension and anxiety is pretty high. Also pretty high is distrust of big organizations. That's both governmental organizations and that's also big business. There is a pretty healthy populist sentiment right now that's percolating inside the Republican primary. The Tea Party element, which I don't necessarily prescribe to all their policy positions, there's pretty healthy distrust in government and big business. I think you can play that to your advantage to some degree. Looking at the numbers, I also think some similarity, I think, between the Democratic side and the Republican side of the aisle is that there is a real focus and the anxiety from a month-to-month basis, from a month-to-month budget basis. You have middle-class voters, middle-class citizens who are working harder and aren't seeing that margin increase. They're having challenge to meet their monthly budget. They're worried about milk costs, energy costs. They're worried about, are they going to take their trip to Disney World this year? That's small business guys, that's medium-sized business guys, that's middle management, that's those who are aspiring to become middle management and those who are aspiring to own their own company. And I think Republican elected officials are starting to come around. I think, and this is where I'll tip my hat to, certainly this administration and Democratic messengers. For the last 8 years, or I will say 8 years ago, Republicans were messaging to the CEOs of the world, and not to the broader audiences, and to be honest with you, not to the Republican primary base. That's why we saw an influx and a real significant turnover in Republican incumbents. I think we're starting to figure that out. I think we're starting to figure out that we got a message to both the middle class, to small business owners, to micro business owners, and so we're trying to figure that out. So how do you do that? I like the way you kind of frame this up and using some of the language. And I was thinking about, certainly you got to establish your brand, establish how you impact the community, whether you're a single individual. I was kind of thinking about myself. We have 3 principals and 2 support staff. We're a micro business. Talk about in terms, certainly jobs, the potential for growth, but also the impact in the community. And, it's somewhat a soft, qualitative aspect, but even Republican individuals see, as they kind of go to their main streets, small towns in rural areas, small towns in suburban areas, they continue to see, boarded up, small businesses. That's starting to resonate. One of my clients, our whole is a large Fortune 10 company, and has a big priority. And we're messaging all about how this affects Main Street, how this is going to help individuals with small businesses, micro businesses with very slim margins, and how it is the current regulation is actually pitting winners and losers. We had a conversation about that. I look forward to that question. But Republicans in general, Republicans, there are a swath of individuals who just say no to any sort of direct government intervention. But I think Republicans, by and large, support public-private partnerships, support efficient ways that government can help those who are where private sector, where there's not a private sector element that can address the situation. I think Republicans are for those sort of public-private partnerships that are done in an efficient way, in a transparent way, in a way that utilizes and leverages taxpayer dollars in the most effective way. And for my, in reading some about your industries and certainly what AEO has put together, I think those are some of the language that I would use. We want to certainly, there's, from a congressional perspective, and I just came from sitting down with the Republican leadership, they're trying to survey what other regulations, Obama administration regulations, are overly burdensome or ineffective, waste of taxpayer dollars, and trying to identify those and trying to start to roll out both legislation here in the next few months and then also messaging around that legislation. So if you can tie into, so there's the part of which, hey, these are public-private partnerships that are filling a need that's not being filled by the private sector. If you can prove that. Number one, start to talk about in terms of, well, we can do this more effectively, we can do this more efficiently. We have ideas in which we can administer, we can maybe change, reform these regulations, reform the Obama administration regulations, do this in a more effective way that utilizes taxpayer dollars and leverages them in a more impactful way that may save money. And then when you talk about the save money side of the equation, that's where you really start to get Republicans' interest. But I would say that's kind of just kind of general recommendations for right now.
Okay. Speaking of the presidential campaign, in each of the parties, do you see any candidates emphasizing the need to address the forgotten communities and to foster business growth in, say, inner city neighborhoods, for example? I mean, that's traditionally been, a lot of Democrats do that, but Republicans in general haven't done that much, but maybe some a little this time.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And the only other thing I want to say about the difference between Republicans and Democrats in this presidential campaign, I saw that NBC Wall Street Journal poll that for Republicans the top issue was national security and fighting terrorism, and for Democrats it was economic growth and jobs. And economic growth, jobs was something like third or fourth on the Republican side.
Right.
Is that going to get lost? Is it going to become a national security election as far as Republicans are concerned?
I do think it's trending that way. From if you look at top 3 issues, I would say my prediction is that national security will be what top 3 issue, if not the top issue. If I told you differently, I wouldn't be true to what I necessarily think and what I'm telling current clients. I do think that there are Republicans, and I think we've learned from our lessons in the last 8 years. You have Rand Paul. Rand Paul has made it a priority to go, and he says explicitly, I want to go into urban areas that have underserved, and I want to, I think, Republican policies help, not just corporate CEOs, not just individuals in rural areas, but also I think everybody wants that growth and opportunity to achieve something more. And I think, I think Marco Rubio spent a lot of time, was down in Miami with him. He loves to talk about, and he's one that I think has taken to heart talking about the middle class messaging and small business messaging. I think he's really, if you look at some of his speeches, really trying to hone in on kind of this swath of individuals, the underserved, the Hispanic communities, that sort of thing. Certainly underserved means different things to different people. I do think, I would personally recommend you talk about in terms of specific underserved groups of individuals, whether it's those in rural areas, those veterans are coming back from overseas. But there are, low-income individuals in urban areas that want to achieve more. I think that's something that will resonate with Republicans.
Yeah, but it seems like, from what I know about Rand Paul's proposals for inner city neighborhoods, it's not really government programs that he's proposing or government investment. It's more like cut taxes and cut regulations in these certain areas, and more of a traditional Republican approach to fostering a good business climate versus direct aid to help people start businesses.
I think we have a bad habit of going straight to taxes from a Republican standpoint, but at the same time, it is a issue that polls pretty high in the Republican primary. I think you got to talk in terms of taxes that's going to benefit all, not just the wealthy. And I hope Rand's going to do that. I hope Rand's going to do that. I hope Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush, Walker, others in the Republican primary. I think there's a way you can talk about taxes that's going to help everyone. So I think that there are certainly tax credits, deductions that probably a lot of individuals in this room take advantage of. And so I think there's ways you can reform the tax code that's going to help everyone, not just wealthy individuals. And I think hoping our areas. But I also do think we do need to talk about the benefits of public-private partnerships. And I think that's how I would phrase it. It's going to be it's not going to be the first thing they go to when they're given in the first day when they're launching their campaign speeches. But I do think the fact that Rand in the first couple stops has made an intention to go into some of these urban areas. Marco's the same way. I'd like to see others. I think they are becoming attuned to that world, and they know at the end of the day they're going to need that. Republicans can't win on wealthy individuals alone. So.
Yeah, so I would say this. The challenge that Republicans are going to have is that their policies don't match up with their message. And so they can, Rand Paul can go to an African American community or to a Latino community. First of all, I'm not sure if we should pat him on the back for that, because that is America, and I think that anyone who wants to be president of the entire country should be visiting these communities. But putting that aside, I think that when you look at what Republicans are pushing for in their budget, which they just passed in the Senate today, there are cuts there to, both to SBA, but also to investments that a lot of these communities depend upon. And I think that the answer for a lot of these folks in these underserved, forgotten communities isn't to cut taxes more. It's not to get rid of regulations. It's for investments. And so I think that's going to be a challenge for Republicans. I do give Rand Paul credit for getting out there on, believe when Michael Brown was murdered, he went out and did an op-ed in Time magazine that I thought was pretty courageous for a Republican to do. But I think, and you saw Hillary Clinton talk a few days ago about the challenges that many low-income communities have, and it's not just a policing issue. This goes back to years and years of neglect and poor management. It goes back into lack of investments in these communities, poor education system. These are all big issues that each candidate, I would hope, addresses. And so, this is where I think we are going to disagree a little bit in terms of the issue of tax cuts and regulations. I mean, look, everyone wants a tax cut. I did a poll a couple months ago, and middle class tax cut was one of the most popular policy measures that Congress could tackle. But also people, Democrats in particular, are focused on measures that will help spread economic opportunity to all and job creation and growth. So that's a message that I think resonates very well with Democrats. And I'll spend 2 seconds on the question about national security versus the economy and jobs. National security is I saw that same poll, is the number one issue right now for Republicans. I think that's partially because the economy is doing well, and that they have, in the conservative right-wing world, they have focused more attention now on foreign policy because they believe that is a vulnerability to the president and also to Secretary Clinton. I would disagree with them, but that's where that focus has gone, whether it's what happened in Benghazi or ISIS or whatever it is. They have focused so much of their time and energy now on national security and foreign policy issues because the arguments that they had against the administration on creating jobs no longer resonate with the general public. I think both parties, though, you're going to ask your question.
Yeah.
No, I thought what you said was funny.
Yeah. Okay. So that and I think that when it resonated a year ago in 2014 when, as I said, polling back then showed that most people thought the economy and the president were not doing, the economy wasn't doing well. That was their perception, and the president was not a good steward of the economy. Now those numbers have changed a bit. They're either even or he's doing, he's seen as being a decent steward of the economy. So it's a harder argument for them to make. Republicans will admit that to you. You don't hear a lot of messaging from Republicans anymore. I was on the Hill for 4 or 5 years, and it was always about where are the jobs, where are the jobs. You don't hear that anymore. And so that is and so they have transitioned to a much more focused message on foreign policy and national security.
So yeah, is
Give it a little-
that
give
the
it a little
case?
ca- you know,
National
I-
security because you ain't got nothing else?
Well, I do watch both. I watch, the whole panoply of news, and I think national security is being more driven by events, not necessarily a change in messaging strategy. I think there are some serious issues that our country needs to handle. I think the last administration has some to blame. I think this administration certainly has a lot of that we can blame as it relates to mismanagement of some geopolitical issues. And so I think those events are driving the attention to national security and not necessarily messaging strategy. But I do think, give credit where credit is due again. I think Democrats have done a great job in talking and messaging to that underserved community. I think Republicans need to do a better job. I think Republicans need to go to those localities. I think Republican policy measures, whether it's tax cuts, whether it's oversight on regulations, whether it's making more efficient ways in which we can form these public-private partnerships, and we can get capital in the hands of those who are underserved. I think everyone feels that regulatory burden who does business in this country. I don't think it's just a tax issue or just a SBA issue or I think there's ways in which I think Republicans look at ways in which we can have a more efficient government that can benefit business, benefit citizens at large. But from a national security question specifically, I think it's more driven by the events necessarily than just message strategy.
And just to bring it back to your all's work and your concerns, when you're going in to meet with a member of Congress or senator, I think it's very important to have those real life stories that you can point to demonstrate why a particular regulation is bad, right? I mean, I think just going in there and saying regulations are bad, you're not going to get a lot of traction with Democrats. But if you can point to, look, I've got, there are 5 businesses that, and I believe the stat was 8,000. I think 8,000 small businesses are declined a loan every day. Is that something? Is it right? So I think that being able to really personalize and put a person put a face to that issue is going to be very important. And tie it back to this is a business that wants to start. Wants to open up shop in a underserved or emerging community or a rural community where their jobs are jobs are left, and they're going to be able to begin to invest in jobs of the future. And so I think it's really important to have those anecdotes, to have those stories. Both Stephen and I have been through campaigns before, both on the corporate and political side, where we always tell our clients, you need to make this real to lawmakers so that they understand the stakes and so that they understand who this is really benefiting. So whether you're advocating for a certain regulation being removed or being cut or added, or a tax cut or a grant, it's always important to bring it back to the larger benefit to hardworking Americans.
I can't agree more. I mean, I think that's right on. I think tell the story. Certain numbers will back up the story and everything else, but tell the story, give it a face, give it a name, give it an impact. I always like to talk about you want to talk about the impact obviously to you because you personally get the larger community that you operate in, whether that's your industry, whether that's small town, urban center, whatever it is, and the larger impact to that community.
Yeah, and that same principle lies dealing with the media as well. We like to get real life case studies and tell the story through people, not just numbers and stats. So what questions? Yeah.
My name is Alex Forrester. I'm curious, there's an organization I was reading some of their research earlier this year called goodjobsfirst.org. And they track large corporate tax credits that are given around the country, and they do reports on mega deals. And basically they say, okay, about $5 billion annually is given out in taxpayer funding to essentially keep jobs from moving from one state to another. And the average cost per job is around $450,000 per job. I know every organization in this room is producing jobs at a much lower cost than that. I'm pretty sure. So the question is, from a political strategy perspective, the disadvantage that organizations in this room and the people we work with have is that beyond the underserved dimension of it, it's also fragmented and diffuse. I'm wondering if there are any classic political strategy case scenarios about how to harness, if 80% of the net new jobs in the country are coming from this sector, but this sector doesn't have the ability to kind of force itself like a wedge and say, you're going to lose 2,000 jobs in your district unless you do this. How do we become politically savvy enough to promote the value of this method of job creation in a way that can tap into what the public is willing to spend on job creation? Dave,
we start talking about efficiency of creating jobs. That's certainly a private sector. that's certainly what starts resonating with Republicans real quick. I mean, like you walk in, you start telling that story, and you'll get folks to kind of listen. Wow, that's, and I know we've got some great things on the website about that as well. And I think that's a story that really starts to resonate. I mean, if I will take a half-hearted hit at the Obama administration, guys on the left, I think they did a really poor job in the past about being part of some big deals for big corporations that were a very ineffective use of taxpayer dollars. I think you have a good case to make how you are a very effective use of taxpayer dollars. And that's something that really resonates with Republicans.
So from a tactical standpoint, the way I would address this is, you have a lot of assets in this room. You have a lot of voices and that can be deployed in a way that will, for lack of a better term, surround the target you're trying to influence. So if it's a Democratic member of the Small Business Committee, or if it's a senator, you've got a lot of different and diverse voices that it's important that you organize and deploy, both from a grassroots level. So whether that's organizing a Hill Day where you go and visit, getting organizing folks to do op-eds and letters to the editor on the issue in the particular district, reaching out to the trusted voices that Democrats listen to, whether that is civil rights groups or whether that is someone like Ezra Klein at Vox or the New York Times editorial board, and reaching out to them and telling your story to them. I think that there are, and so I think the way I would answer that question is, you have a wealth of talent and very, I think, well-regarded, incredible voices in here, and part of it is organizing them in a way that gets your message across, and you can get it across through the earned media, and that's the opinion pages, through social media, reaching out to progressive bloggers so they have a better understanding of the investments that you all are making that are helping underserved, forgotten communities, or not just underserved, but rural communities, all communities for that matter. And so I think that, like any campaign, you have to deploy your assets, you have to deploy your surrogates, and you have to make sure that people understand who's benefiting. And that goes back to a point we both made about, thanks. That goes back to a point we both made about the point about, what was that point?
Whatever point you made.
No, that goes back to, yeah, I feel like we're Governor Perry. No, but I think, again, it goes. So I think that a lot of it starts, and this is not necessarily it's not rocket science. It is identifying the concerns of Democrats and matching them up with the people in this room who can effectively speak to those concerns, and deploying, and I forgot what we were talking about were those real stories and those anecdotes, and making sure that when you go to members of Congress that they do know of the businesses and the small business owners that didn't get that did not get are still looking for financing in those districts. So I think use your talent here. You've got a lot of talent. You've got a lot of assets that you can deploy, and then go to the places where Democrats or Republicans, for that matter, get their information and start informing them on your issues.
One of the big advantages I think you have is you have a very diverse coalition that obviously you have similar business models, but you have, I'm assuming what I've read and what Connie and her team have told us, is that you guys touch a lot of different industries. I mean, so many times we work with clients who are a very specific industry. You can only have so many, widget X manufacturer go and find the CEO, the middle management, the guy on the line, and talk to. You have I think a benefit of being, whether yourselves or those that you work with, you come from a broad individuals yourself, whether it's race or what have you, or whether it's industry as well, and having multiple touches by different people in a wide spectrum. that starts to get the elected official thinking, wow, this is not just one kind of stovepipe, profile. And I think that's really important. And there's ways, obviously, as was mentioned, is there ways you can deploy that in a tactical way that kind of also covers the broad spectrum of the way people digest information, right? And you mentioned, that's just, from a tactical perspective, here, back at home, town hall, new media, layers together. But all this stuff really, really helps. There's no real one silver bullet anymore. The days of old where you had a relationship with the chairman of a committee and he could get X, those are gone. Now you really have to surround people with your message, coming from different opinions, in different modes, in different surrogates.
Yeah.
You mentioned, whether from a Republican perspective, certainly Fox News, but not just Fox News, Wall Street, the Wall Street Journal, the panoply of think tanks from the hard right to the, Main Street coalitions, AEIs, Heritage of the World, those sort of, universities and academics. You really do got to surround a decision maker with your views.
Yeah, and doing it in their district always makes a difference. Senators and members of Congress, one of the quickest ways to get them to react is to have, a bunch of noise in their district or their state. Typically if it's in Washington, they can ignore it to some degree. They shouldn't, but once their district office starts getting calls and visits, that's when, you can pretty much bet that the member is going to say, okay, well, we really need to take a look at this.
I just wanted to add one thing on your question, because a lot of those tax incentives, tax breaks for companies are at the state and local level, and there's a lot of economic development research that shows that the best way to grow a local economy is from within.
Right.
Growing your businesses that are already there, or helping the folks that are already there grow businesses, not trying to do the smokestack chasing or the headquarters chasing that a lot of economic development folks like to do in the past. So I think get a hold of that research. That'd be a good way to convince your local and state officials, saying, hey, this is kind of short-sighted, or if you're going to do this, let's put a little more investment into growing our own. So I think that's all her first, and then we'll go.
Plus, someone handed me a microphone.
That's right.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about working across the aisle and how you've seen, where you see the challenges and the opportunities in pursuing bipartisan support for issues like this.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So, one of the things that I found when I left the Hill is that I spent a lot of time working with Republicans on issues. It's not nearly as, I don't think the city is as nearly as divided as it's portrayed. And I can think of 3 big issues where you have Republicans and Democrats working together, and there are divisions on the extremes of both parties. But if you think about immigration reform, if you think about trade, and if you think about Ex-Im bank financing, those are 3 issues where Democrats and Republicans, for the most part, again, you have Republicans and Democrats who disagree on some of those issues, but for the most part, there's a lot of bipartisan agreement on those 3 issues, and those are 3 big issues. And so, and I think that looking forward, I think ultimately, we struggle with a political system that is driven by the extremes of both parties. Both Republicans and Democrats have a problem with, especially heading into primary season, and Stephen knows this very well, and Democrats are starting to learn it a little bit more, but the extremes of both parties drive candidates to take positions that they probably don't really believe in, but they're trying to win a primary, and then they spend the whole general election trying to go to the middle. Ideally for the good of the country, candidates will look at what's best for the country, and not necessarily what's best for their electoral prospects. And I think, look, I look at Jeb Bush, for example, running for the Republican nomination, and look, I'm not going to vote for him, but I give him credit, on things like immigration reform, for taking a position that's going to be unpopular with the base of the party. It's not popular with the whole party, but it's unpopular in a primary, and he's taken a tough, courageous position on that, and he hasn't wavered. And I think that's that's a promising sign. But hopefully, look, I think in order for this system to be fixed, there's a lot of things that have to happen. Everything from redistricting reform to the spending that occurs from on the outside by both parties, and that'll, I think, goes, that'll help in some ways improve the system. I think members of Congress and senators also just need to spend a little more time together. There was a time 20 years ago where these people, they fought on the floor, but they were friends, and a lot of the stories about Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, and even Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich, they got in horrible fights publicly, but they were able to work together behind the scenes to get things done. And in some ways, look, there are some examples of that today. I mean, I think that trade could be an example of that. There have been a number of victories for the administration and Republicans that have occurred over the last 5 or 6 years. We don't hear a lot about them because the media doesn't really necessarily want to cover where there has been actually cooperative work together. But where I operate today and where I work today, I am more optimistic about the ability of doing big things than I think if I was working on the Hill.
All right, let me jump in here, since I'm one of the media pessimists or whatever.
Yes.
You mentioned those 3 issues, trade, immigration reform, and Exim Bank. I mean, there's a chance you're not going to get any of them.
Sure, absolutely.
I mean, and that's what, I guess my default position after covering Congress over the past 15 years, and in my perception, the partisanship has just gotten worse and worse. And like you said, the extremes are driving the agenda more. That my default position is that any given bill is not going to pass until you prove otherwise.
Yeah, I agree. Ken, I agree. I think
and on trade, I don't see a lot of Democratic support other than from the president.
Other than the president,
for the trade agreements.
The president's a big deal.
Yeah, well,
He signs the bill.
The president doesn't have a vote. The
He
Congress.
signs the bill, though. I mean,
Well, if he can't sign it, if it doesn't get to him.
well, but the fact that the administration is strongly supporting the trade bill is as I mentioned, there are Democrats who are on the left side who oppose the trade bill. But yet you are right. There's a chance that none of these get done. But if we're looking at possible areas where the 2 parties are working together, those are 3 areas where there has been some constructive work. Immigration reform probably won't happen in the next 2 years, and that's disappointing. But the bill passed out of the Senate, which is a pretty big achievement. And so, but I agree. I mean, I think that partisanship has gotten worse. I think partisanship has been bad for going back to Bill Clinton when he got impeached. So, but I do think that there are areas where the parties have put aside, the partisanship to try to do something. And hopefully there'll be more. I don't expect there to be more, but
We have a recent example right here. We had Speaker Boehner basically took it on his back to try to reform healthcare entitlement system and join the Democrats to be able to do that. It's a recent example. It's one of the few. Maybe trade is, maybe, and I do applaud the president of really kind of getting in here and working this. We'll see. I mean, proof is going to be in the pudding, right? Let's see what the votes at the end of the day. Advise clients, if you want to kill something, in DC terms, you make it partisan. You want to pass them, it's got to be bipartisan. Even though Republicans control both chambers, the way the Senate works, I'm a Senate guy, spent a number of years up there, you got to form a bipartisan consensus because of the rules to get through. And even now in the House, and we talked a little bit about, there's a good 20 or so Republicans who are the just say no Republicans. Whether that's the White House's priorities or Republican leadership priorities. And that actually forces, in a lot of cases, Republican leadership to deal with Democrats. So I think you only get things done in a bipartisan manner. And I do think there are some, trade hopefully one. This, I think we'll see how the spending and appropriations goes. There's some opportunities here, I think, as we go down towards the end of the year on the spending side of the equation. I think there's actually a number of Republicans who are, whether they're compelled because the only way they actually have oversight over the executive branch is through the appropriation process. And the fact that Republicans have relinquished because pulling back on any sort of earmark or oversight from an appropriation perspective, but just let the administration do whatever they want now. I think they acknowledge now they got to get more involved. And so maybe there's ways in which we can mutually get more involved in the regulatory side of the equation if we get more involved in giving, how we decide and how they spend the money side of the equation. So I think there's an effort within the Republican conference to try to get people to play ball on appropriations packages. We'll see if that happens or not. But there are ways, I think, certainly the primary process, I think to a significant degree has made members, incumbents, those running for election take more partisan stances early. You still have a core group, both Democrats and Republicans, who do want to work across the aisle to get things done.
I have a different question.
Yes.
Before you guys got here, we were in a section talking about futures and thinking, 10, 15 years out. The kinds of things that we see today happen, pretty much we can get something passed that is tinkering at the edges. Nothing that's really going to solve some of the big issues we care about. High double rates of unemployment in black communities and other communities of color, some of the capital issues. I mean, some low wealth, people not having, wealth being stripped out of many communities through home and equity ownership and those kinds of things, which my personal belief, this is not speaking on behalf of AEO, but my personal belief is that we have to have new kinds of thinking, new kinds of solutions. How do we get politicians to go there? To, getting a regulation changed or dropped or whatever. Yeah, we can figure out how to get that done, I think. But that's not what we really need to really move communities forward. And thinking about the future. What advice can you give us on how to get better solutions, more innovative solutions? And I can give you examples if you need it, but how do we get that kind of real solutions and innovative conversations going with politicians?
If you may be candid, I think that happens in this next administration change. Whether Democrat or Republican, I think unfortunately we're stuck in a situation, and I unfortunately don't have a lot of optimism for big deals for the next year and a half. I think it's going to be very challenging to do something significant, and I'm talking about really structural change in big macro policies in the next year and a half. I think if I was I would say focus on this administration, focus on those candidates, the candidate organizations, those influencers of those candidates and those staff. I think that's how and then foster conversation there. Certainly, leadership, the congressional leadership and members of Congress will be part of those conversations. But if you want big ideas, structural ideas, those come with new administrations. Very rarely in the modern, in the last, I would say, 30, 40 years, do you see structural changes originating in Congress. We're looking, tax reform is always a big idea. I know I'm coming back to my Republican roots here. But tax reform is always a big idea. There's been structural tax reform since 1986. Entitlement change. Entitlement reform hasn't happened in 50 years in a real way. That's going to happen. But there's a lot of I think those ideas, certainly healthcare was a big structural change, but that could come around with a new administration. So from a strategic and a tactical perspective, what I would say is target these candidates, both on the Republican side of the aisle and Democrat side of the aisle. Republican side of the aisle, you got to understand the Republican primary, understand who influences the way these guys think. Deploy your surrogates, South Carolina, New Hampshire, Iowa, Florida. Those are the big states. Those outlets that they digest the information from. Percolate your ideas in that manner with the staff. I think that's how you're going to get structural reform, not through Congress the next year and a half.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree. I would agree 100% with Stephen in terms of tactically how to get this done. Make it part of the conversation during the primary season. Go to the Des Moines Register and the major news outlets that are going to be covering the presidential campaign and try to get the issue as part of the debate, and that'll force the candidates to take a position. So, whether it's New Hampshire or whether it's Iowa, Florida, South Carolina, Nevada, I think having a plan to influence and inform the opinion leaders in those states will go a long way. I mean, the ideal is, there's, Hillary Clinton is in a town hall in New Hampshire, and someone in the town hall audience asks her a question, right? And then she has to take a position or answer it, or ultimately say, "I'll get back to her." We'll get back to you. But so that's one. I mean, I think that's a really smart and correct way to try to make it part of the future conversation.
Yeah, now I was just thinking about the town hall meetings. There's going to be hundreds of them, so that's a great opportunity. All right, we're going to move down to more of a lightning round because we're coming toward the end. So quick questions, quick answers.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. And I really appreciated the way you framed the conversation up front. My name is Gina Wood, and I'm on the AEO board. And I just want to sort of challenge you a bit in terms of this notion that Congress has not been working well together. I think we've seen some real positive things that have happened in a bipartisan context over the last month. And I just wanted to point out three very specific things. One was the Medicare doc fix. I mean, I think that was very significant. Another one was, it's been like 39 years ago in terms of the Toxic Substance Abuse Control Act is another one. And then the last one is Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So those are three very specific bipartisan efforts that have taken place. I mean, I think there's a long way to go, but I just wanted to kind of challenge you on that. And I think, from my perspective, I think a lot of it has to go behind the scenes in terms of what made those three specific efforts work, is that there were folks working from the outside, working with the staff very closely across the aisle in terms of that. So I just wanted to kind of point that out, that I don't think it's totally doom and gloom in Congress, that there are some glimmers, I think, that things that are happening.
Yeah.
I just don't want us to lose sight of that.
I would agree with you. I think that there have been some accomplishments by this current Congress, and look, quite frankly, that helps the 9 or 10 Senate Republicans who are up for re-election. They can say that, we're not just going to be, we're not dysfunctional. We know how to lead and govern. So I would, I think that it benefits. Look, I think, and this is one of those instances where getting things done actually benefits both parties, and it helps the president. That helps his approval numbers. That helps Democrats. If the Republicans can, if Republicans pass something and it becomes law, then Mitch McConnell can say, "Look, see, put us in power, and we've started to get rid of the gridlock." So it's actually, I agree with you.
I agree with you 100% as well. And I think that doc fix deal was a really big deal. I think people are going to look back on it and see, and this is I think will probably be one of the top accomplishments as we look back over the last, I'd say at least last 2 years, maybe even longer. I was very involved in the ABLE Act. It's a great example of the parties coming together and doing something that's really meaningful and in a bipartisan way. So, I agree with you.
So in the spirit of a lightning round question, after 2016 elections, are we going to have divided government, president from one party and Congress in another, or are we going to have the same? Will it matter?
There you go. This is our last question.
I think there'll be divided government after 2016.
For 100 days, it won't. I think you'll see a change in administration. You'll see the administration get a couple priorities passed in the first year, and then we'll see. Most likely prediction is that we'll probably have, to some degree, there won't be significant structural changes in Congress, I don't think. But I do think you'll have a president, a new administration, coming off, who has the ability to pass some pretty significant items there in the first year or two.
Okay, I guess that's it. Well, thank you all for this.